What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Trojan Dash Sports. I'm your host, Reagan Griffin Jr., and I am joined by Nathan Ackerman. I'm excited to get this thing rolling, man. Nathan, how we doing today?
Dude, I can't wait to get this thing rolling. This has been in the works for a few weeks, even a few months now, and I've been looking forward to this day. And here we are. Let's get this thing kicked off.
Let's get it going, man. I'm excited. But before we get into it, I would be remiss if I didn't shout out Sam. I know he doesn't like the credit, but the dude's putting all this thing together, and he's behind the scenes producing this stuff. So shout out to Sam. But with that said, I don't want to talk about Sam anymore. Let's talk about USC football, man. This week, big news drop. Jay Tufele out. If there's going to be a spring season, he's not going to play. He's going to opt in for the NFL draft. That's where his priorities are at. Understandable decision. Nathan, what are your thoughts on this occurrence?
Yeah, I think, look, USC's defensive line was obviously going to be probably the second strongest position group for this team behind obviously the wide receivers. But I think, if there's any unit that can overcome a guy like Jay leaving, it's probably the defensive line. I mean, they're still stacked. Drake Jackson's still a beast. They got several guys that can definitely make up for that. I mean, he's probably going to be a late first round pick, maybe an early second round pick. So it's definitely going to be a tough loss. But I think if there's any team that can overcome losing a first round talent, in the case of if there is a spring season, I think it's got to be USC.
Agreed, man. I wouldn't quite put them at second strongest position group. I very much like it's hard not to say the quarterback position, right, with Keaton Slovis. But Jay was definitely going to be a strong player for the team. He was going to plug that middle. Actually, they switched. I didn't even realize they did this, but with Todd Orlando coming in, there's no longer 4 down linemen. There's 3 down linemen, and Jay was going to be that nose tackle holding up and plugging that hole. So it's going to be interesting. Who do you think is going to replace him on that defensive line at the nose tackle position?
I think there are a number of guys that could probably take his place. Connor Murphy, I think, is one that really stands out to me. I mean, we saw him at times last year. He didn't really start, but he was a guy that you could kind of plug in whenever you needed a guy, and I think he always got the job done. I mean, he can play pretty much any spot on the defensive line, and I think right now, I mean, obviously there are a lot of factors that are going to play into this. More guys might even opt out. You're going to have to see how guys play in camp, but I think right now Connor Murphy's probably looking like a safe bet.
A guy that came to mind for me was Brandon Peely, and I know he has a sister that plays basketball here at USC, but he's just such a strong figure. When I think about what you need at that nose tackle position, right? When you think about the strategy of it, the nose tackle, you're not having him pass rush. He's not going up the field trying to sack the quarterback. His primary job is to plug 2 A gaps, right? Lock down, hold steady, make sure nothing gets in and out of that gap. I think Brandon Peely has the strength, right? The brute strength that you would need to accomplish that. So that would be my favorite, but it's all going to be a matter of how that thing plays out in camp. But this is going to be a thing that I think we see more USC football players do, right? Because we have a lot of guys who could be potential first-round talents. Who do you think, hypothetically, if they were to opt out for the draft, which would be the biggest hurt piece for USC to not have on the roster?
I would say Talanoa Hufanga. I think, of all the draft hopefuls, and USC certainly has many. I think the guy that they can least afford to lose is, a guy that pretty much was the anchor of the defensive unit last year. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown could certainly opt out, but I think, the fact that USC's wide receivers are so deep and they have so many guys that are so talented there, I think obviously that would be a difficult loss to overcome. But I think Hufanga, he can tackle, he can blitz, he sacks guys, he can do everything that a safety typically needs to do. I think that he's a guy that USC could really needs to keep, kind of holding the defensive unit together. I think he's probably USC's best overall defensive player. I mean, Drake Jackson probably gives him a run for his money there. You could say, those two are, I mean, they play obviously such different spots, but I think Hufanga, well, maybe he's not the most overall talented guy that could potentially opt out for the draft. I think he's the guy that USC could least afford to lose.
And in studying Todd Orlando's scheme and things that they've said in the past, the safety position is so key, right? That's really the quarterback of the defense. Sometimes they have the middle linebacker do it, but in this particular defense, that safety position is really the guy that's running the show. So Hufanga, I do think, would be a pretty big hurt piece. But let me flip you this, because I'm not sure how confident I am when it comes to the depth behind the starting line, the offensive line. So Elijah Vera Tucker to me is a guy, if you lose him, I'm not sure how good the people are behind him. They're just from a lack of experience standpoint, right? Those guys haven't gotten in-game reps. Elijah is I want to say the most experienced guy on that offensive line with the exception of maybe the center. I'm forgetting his name right now, but that's a guy that you very much need, especially he's going to be playing that left tackle position. That's the guy defending Keaton's blind side, right? Like you need that guy to hold it down. So if he's not doing it, I'm not Brett Nealon. My producer came in clutch with that center. Thank you. But without Elijah, right, you might have to plug in Jalen at that Jalen McKenzie at that left tackle position. I'm not sure if he's exactly built for that. He's more of a right tackle in my mind. But the dudes behind him at left tackle, they don't have the game reps that you would need for me to feel confident that they're going to be protecting Keaton's blind side like they need to, man. So Elijah to me. But tell me more about Hufanga, man. Tell me why you think he'd be more of a hurt piece.
I want to take this back a little bit because I do think that losing AVT could definitely be a tough loss for this team. I also think, though, that the way USC's offense is constructed, I mean, the wide receivers are so deep. Keaton is so accurate. And not only that, but he gets the ball out in such a quick amount of time that I think, obviously, you need a good offensive line to be able to buy him time for the whole offense to do anything. I mean, you can have, stacked running back, stacked quarterback, receivers, tight end. You can have the whole, stacked guys at every single group. But I mean, if they don't have time to get the ball out, I think, you're not going to be able to do much with that offense. But I think that USC this year will be able to get by with just a passable, even if it's not a great offensive line. I mean, Keaton gets the ball out so quick. He's so accurate. The wide receivers are so talented that I think, you plug in McKenzie there, and I think he can definitely be good enough to get the job done. I think they have guys, even if AVT were to leave, I think it would obviously be a big loss because he could be a, late first round, early second round type talent. And, he's definitely USC's best offensive lineman now that Austin Jackson's gone. But I just think that if he were to go, I think USC has the offensive weapons to be able to overcome that. And I think that specifically the way that they're constructed and the type of QB that, we have, I think USC would definitely be able to overcome that. With Hufanga, I think, USC's linebacker group is obviously not great. And I think you need, physical guys that can hit guys hard. And that typically is a sort of a linebacker prototype. But I think, Hufanga sort of does that job where he plays. And I think USC's, cornerbacks are not the strongest in the Pac-12. I mean, we see the talent with OG, with Chris Steele. But I think, they've definitely played inconsistently so far, at least in 2019. I think that Hufanga definitely holds that unit together, and he, makes sure USC doesn't get killed by the deep ball in every single play. Because I think that's something that, USC was definitely prone to, those bombs to all the talented wide receivers in the Pac-12. And I think Hufanga is just so physical. I think his overall presence there is enough to sort of take that part of the game away. And I think, again, even if he's not the most talented player that might leave for the draft, I think he's the one that USC would hurt the most by losing. But I want to ask you, aside from AVT, I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown could definitely be one guy that leaves that leaves for the draft. I mean, do you think USC's receiving group is obviously pretty stacked? Do you think USC would be able to overcome that?
I think so. Now, when we talk about just Amon-Ra, we would probably be able to overcome that, right? You still got dudes like Brew McCoy. You still have Drake Jackson. I mean, not Drake Jackson, Drake London, excuse me. But you still have plenty of crop of very talented receivers. Now, if you flip me the question of Amon-Ra and Tyler Vaughns decided to go and opt out for the NFL draft, that might be a little bit of a hurt because now you're talking about dudes that Keaton, as great of a quarterback he doesn't have a rapport with that many people on the team, right? The primary guys he was throwing the ball to, Drake London, Michael Pittman's gone. So if you take Amon-Ra and Tyler Vaughns out of that equation, now you have a bunch of receivers who you haven't developed that level of chemistry yet. Thankfully, you have all of this time, right, since the season's going to be postponed to try to develop that chemistry, but there's no simulating game action, right? So there has to be a level of trust that's developed there. So if both of those guys were to opt out, that would be a struggle. But just the one, Amon-Ra, I think that they would be able to overcome that. I do want to address this, though, man, because the way you talked about Elijah, how he would affect or how the offensive line would be able to overcome that because you don't need necessarily a great offensive line if Keaton's getting the ball out quick. Are you one of those dudes that doesn't care about the run game? Tell me you're not one of those dudes.
No.
Because
No,
I think
no.
that's really where you're getting, yeah, because obviously you have Steven Carr, right? You have a lot of talented running backs who haven't, they're going to do it by committee and nobody's really separated themselves at this moment. But as a collective, that's a pretty talented running back core. So I think that's really where you're hurting if you lose Elijah Vera Tucker, not necessarily in the pass game, but in the run game. We saw how weak the run game was last year. If you lose a guy like that, I expect more of the same this coming year. So I really would like to see him stay just because of the run game, right? That's probably a selfish thing on my part, but I would like to see him stay because I want to see that run game flourish like I think that it can.
Yeah, I'm actually very low on USC's run game this year, and I was low on it last year. I just think that if USC's run game were to take a hit next year, I think they could overcome that because the wide receiving group is so stacked, and the way the offense is constructed, it's built around Keaton throwing it to Vaughn, St. Brown, London. I just think that the potential hit that USC could take if they lose a key offensive lineman, yeah, it would definitely hurt the run game even more. But I think even if everybody stays, the run game this year is not going to be great. And I think with the running backs that you have there and the offensive line there, I just think it doesn't really make for a great combination of guys that are going to be able to run the ball for 150, 200 yards per game, or even total as a group. So I think the potential loss that USC would get in terms of the running game, if they were to lose a key offensive lineman, it would definitely hurt because it's already not a great aspect of their game to begin with. But I think we have to consider what really is the ceiling for this group. And I think that if they were to take a hit like that, I don't know if it would take away a huge part of their game plan. I mean, they're not built around running the ball as they shouldn't be because that's not where their strengths are. So I think I would definitely be more concerned about pass protection if the offensive line were to lose a key guy like that, and I think that that's definitely something that they could overcome. But I'm not too worried about the effect it'll have on the running game because I wasn't that big on it to begin with.
So here's my thing, right? When we talk about the ceiling of the running back core, that's not great. I agree with you. They probably won't have an elite running game like we saw Utah with Zach Moss last year, but you still have to have it, right? You have to have that in your bag. Otherwise, teams are just going to take all their guys out of the box, and it's going to be a struggle for Keaton to throw the ball to anyone. So I think a guy like Elijah Vera Tucker, he's the difference between that running game being passable or god awful. That's to me what he really brings to the table. Because if it's god awful, then it could be a struggle for Keaton to really flourish in that air raid offense. Just because you pull out, you'll see teams starting to run nickel defenses, having 1, 2 maybe linebackers in the game. So that could get to be a struggle for Keaton. So that's my biggest concern. I want to keep it pushing though. On the flip side, who do you think would benefit the most from the spring season, right? Because we're in this part of a fluctuation where we don't know. Urban Meyer said there's no way they could pull off a spring season. I have friends that play college football. They don't understand how a spring season would work if there's also going to be a fall season in the same year. Who on this team that's a potential NFL draft prospect would benefit most if there were an NFL or a spring season because they need to show off their ability a little bit more?
Amon-Ra St. Brown for sure. I think Amon-Ra has been he's been talented. We've seen his talent ever since he came to USC. I mean, he's one of the most physical receivers in the Pac-12. He can make any play in traffic. He doesn't fly, but he's definitely quick enough to get the job done. And he's sort of been, I think he's been hiding in the shadows for the last couple of years with Michael Pittman and Vaughn's. They've been USC's 1 and 2 options for the last couple of years. And I think now that Michael Pittman's gone, I think this is the opportunity that Amon-Ra needs to say, look, if I'm the number 1 option or even the number 2 option for any team, I can give you 160 yards per game for sure. And I don't know if that's something that you can conclude based on the last couple of seasons, just because there were so many guys stealing his spotlight. And I think, again, now that Pittman's gone, especially if Vaughn chooses to opt out, I think Amon-Ra could definitely be the number 1 or the number 2. Personally, I'm bigger on Amon-Ra than I am on Vaughn's, but even if Amon-Ra becomes, the number 2 option this year, I think scouts are really going to see that and say, this guy, when given the opportunities, he can flourish. He can be a stud. He can be easily an NFL-bound guy. I think right now he would probably be a late 2nd, early 3rd round pick just because I don't think he's shown enough per se But I think that if he were to be in an offense where he's the number one guy or one of the top two guys, especially with a guy like Keaton throwing him the ball every week, I think Amon-Ra will put up some crazy numbers. And I don't know if he's going to be able to show off as much based on 2019 and 2018 if there's no spring season.
Understood. And he's definitely a guy, I agree with you. That's somebody even coming out of high school, right? People pointed at him. That's the guy right there. He has all the gifts. And, when you play behind guys like Pittman and like Vaughns, you want to, give the leeway to those guys because they've been there for longer. They're going to get the majority of the targets. I'm torn here, man. Last night when we talked about it, I said I think Vaughns. But the more that I think about it, I might be on just the Vera Tucker train today, man, because, again, that dude, right, he played guard last season, if I remember correctly, and now they're swinging him out to the tackle. He either played right tackle or guard, but I believe it was guard. And he's a guy that in the modern NFL, to have a guy who can play multiple positions on the offensive line successfully, that's an extremely valuable thing to have. I'm an Eagles fan, right? There we had this dude, Halapula Vidi Vaitai. He did that, right? He was a right tackle. He played left tackle, moved him down the guard. And the reason he stuck around for so long, he wasn't that great of a player, but he stuck around because he was versatile, right? So a guy like Elijah Vera Tucker, if you can prove to these scouts that you can play multiple positions, I can go play left guard, I can go play right tackle, I can play left tackle. That holds a lot of value, man. So, when these NFL scouts are looking at you and they're saying, okay, what separates this guy from that guy? They're really grasping at straws. And if you bring to the table that, hey, I can play 3 positions on your offensive line, I can provide depth at all of these positions, that holds a lot of value. So this season was going to be key for him to show I can play multiple positions on this offensive line, man. So on that end, I want to say I'm leaning more towards Vera Tucker, but I do think Vaughns would benefit a lot from the season as well, just because he's playing behind Pittman the entire time. And Pittman, he was a early second-round pick, right? That dude was a stud. And it's hard to really flourish when you have a dude like that right there. And you've always had these great receivers, right, when Tyler Vaughns was here. And he's kind of been in the shadows, but really racking up some numbers. He's on like the top 10, I want to say, yards. It's either yards or touchdowns list for USC receivers all time. And when you look at the receivers that USC has had throughout their history, that's an insane thing to think for a guy that's really never been the number one receiver at this school. He's always been in that secondary position, but he racks up his numbers. I think this would be his season to really show everybody, hey, I can go to your team. He's a really smooth route runner. I don't think he's going to be a number one receiver at the next level, but I darn sure think he could go be a very, very good number 2, if not just a very nice guy to have in the slot position. So I think this season was going to be very key for him. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, though, man. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you somewhat. I think that, look, last year, scouts were almost as big on Vaughns as they were on Pittman. I mean,
Really?
yeah, I mean, people really, really liked this guy. And I think if he had declared for the draft, he probably would have been picked after Pittman, of course, because Pittman was, pretty hands down first round or early. So he ended up being I think, second pick in the second round. But people really, really liked Vaughns. They liked his ability to catch jump balls. They liked he's fast. I think I agree that I think Vaughns will definitely have more room to kind of grow and kind of show off that he can be the guy without Pittman there. But I think he's already looking pretty good. I think scouts already like him a lot. And I don't know if he has much more left to prove. I mean, the fact that he did what he did last year with Pittman there, and he still put up crazy numbers, and he still was, a wide receiver 1 caliber type of guy for SC. I think he can definitely boost his draft stock a bit. I don't really see him, elevating himself quite to that mid first round, late first round type. I don't know if he's a first round talent right now, and I don't even know if a spring season could get him there. Of course, he could totally prove me wrong. But I think that people are already so big on Vaughns that I don't know if it would make a huge difference. I don't know if losing that spring season would necessarily mean losing an opportunity to show people that he's a stud, because I think he's already done that. And I think people already like him a lot. And as of now, he would probably be an early round draft pick. And I don't know if there's anything he can really do to lose traction there. And I don't know if there's anything he can do to gain a bunch either.
See, I'm not even sure if he gets that early round draft pick now, because when we think about last year's draft, right, you had CeeDee Lamb, you had Jerry Jeudy, you had all these talented receivers. But this year's draft might be even better, man. You got Devontae down there in Alabama. You got Ladrian Waddle. I think he can come out. You got Jamar Chase, obviously. the dude out of Wake Forest. I'm forgetting his name right now. Sage Surratt, I think it is. But you have so many great receivers, right? It's going to be very tough to separate yourself. And Amon-Ra, he's already somewhat separated himself because his name is already one that's familiar. I'm not sure if Vaughn's ever got that name familiarity because, again, he's just never been the number one receiver. So I do think he would be benefiting. I'm not sure I would venture to say he'd be the number one receiver on this particular team, but it'd be more of a 1A, 1B. You have Amon-Ra working primarily out of the slot, and you have Tyler Vaughns being the primary outside receiver, which he's never been since he's been at USC just because the thing's always been stacked, right? So I definitely think he would benefit, man, because as things stand right now, I'm not sure he would see day two. He would be lucky to see day two in my mind. And I think he's a day two at the very least prospect, but just because it's so stacked and because he's never been the one receiver on his team, I'm not sure he would actually get there. But I know we have a disagreement, man, and I want to get into it. And this is a disagreement that a lot of USC fans have, and I might be standing alone on this, but I want to talk about Clay Helton, man. I want to talk about Clay Helton. I'll give you the floor first. I want you to speak your piece, but all I ask is that when I speak my piece, I need to have my floor, man. I just need to have my floor. I'll let you go first, though.
Look, I already know where you stand on this, so I do just want to confirm that you are definitely the only person who feels this way. What you're about to say on this show is something that has never been uttered by any USC fan in the last several years. But the thing that I'm curious about is all of this, pandemic cancellation, postponement, whatever you want to call it, is all of this weirdness unfolding in college football and the Pac-12 this year. Is this buying Clay Helton another season? And the reason I say that is we're going to see, as we've talked about, we're going to see a lot of guys across the whole sport opt out because of draft reasons this year. And I think USC might be one of the hardest hit teams by that, just simply, if not because they're one of the most talented teams and they have the most NFL hopeful guys. So I think they could definitely see, the brunt of sort of players opting out and not playing in the spring, if there even is a spring, But I think given everything and given all the unpredictability and all the obstacles the team and Clay himself are going to have to overcome, I just wonder if this is, going to essentially give him a free pass for the 2021 season or the 2021 spring, because I feel like Clay's leash is a lot longer than a lot of people want to think. I mean, if there was a reason there's been reasons to fire him before and they just haven't pulled the trigger yet. So I think that they're going to look at this and they're probably going to say, this was unpredictable. This was an outlier. There's an asterisk by this whole season in just about every way. And because of that, we can't pull the plug on Clay just yet. But I want to hear what you have to say.
These changes don't buy Clay Helton another year because Clay Helton has already earned another year. In my humble opinion, let me tell you why. Because Clay Helton, right, there's different kinds of leaders, especially when we talk about football coaches. I've had coaches who are going to yell, scream, get in your face, try to kick you in the rear end to motivate you. I've had coaches that, like to do everything their way. They don't give a crap what their offensive and defensive coordinators say. That's not the type of dude that Clay Helton is. And I can respect his leadership because he's not exactly the dude that's going to strategize his way into winning. And he's not exactly the dude that's going to light a fire under his team. But he's employed people who do those things, and he's willing to let them do your job. Sometimes as a leader, what you do is you let your subordinates do what you hired them to do. And that's what I think Clay Helton's doing a remarkable job of right now. You know what? I don't know how to run an offense that's going to, tear through the Pac-12. Let me give you that, Graham Harrell. You got this air raid thing. It's working out beautifully. You know what? This defense has not been good in the past. Let me give this to another dude who's proven that he can turn around defenses quickly. He can do that. You know what? Maybe I'm not the best recruiter in the world. Let me go bring in Dante Williams from Oregon, the best recruiter in the Pac-12. Y'all got this thing. Let me sit back and just make sure everything's cool, right? Let me just manage the players, make sure everything's cool with them, and make sure I'm steering this thing in the right direction, right? Sometimes that's what you need to do as a leader. So I respect that from Clay Helton, the fact that he's willing to bring in, right? He's not threatened by anybody. He's willing to bring in talented people and let them do their jobs, man. So for that, I think Clay Helton, you know what? You don't have to buy yourself another year with everything. You've earned the right to stay here for at least another 2 to 3 years. I want to see what he does with this very much revamped staff, man. I think I'm excited to see what the future holds.
Okay. I understand what you're saying about the whole, Clay Helton might not light a fire under guys, but he sort of sits back and lets the people do their job well. And I want to sort of, question that a bit. Don't you need a head coach that is going to take – I think that the role of a head coach is to take talented players and get the most out of those talented players. That doesn't necessarily mean he's, drawing up the offensive playbook. He's coming up with all the defensive schemes. It means he's sort of that leader in the clubhouse that's going to say, okay, we have the talent here. We have the pieces to get this done. It's my job to, whether that's light a fire, whether that's to yell at them when I need to. It was so frustrating for me last year when USC would come out and have an embarrassing loss, and he would come out, he would sit in front of the media, and I get that he says different things to the media than he says in the clubhouse post game. I get that, but he just had sort of this tone that was like, here's one or two good individual performances that didn't really matter much, and these are great bright spots moving forward. And it's just so tone deaf because his team's lost by 23, whatever it was, points to Oregon, and there are much bigger issues at hand that I don't think he really. I oftentimes I wonder if it's like clicking for him that there needs to be a sense of urgency, and he needs to sort of light a fire under this team more than he is, because USC is one of the most talented rosters in the Pac-12 in the country. But they're not anywhere near one of the best teams, and I think that points to a lack of a head coach being able to get the most out of those players and take all that talent and turn it into production.
And what does he do? You know what? I'm not the dude who's gonna light a fire under dudes. So what do I go and do? I'm gonna go hire somebody that I know is gonna light a fire under some people. I mean, have you heard what Todd Orlando's been talking about, man? I want to run these dudes through the ringer. I want to make sure that they struggle now so they don't have to struggle during the season. I'm not gonna be the one to do it. I'm more of a cool, nonchalant type of dude, but I'll go get the guy that I know can do the job that needs to be done here. I respect that out of Clay Helton, man. If you're not that dude, don't try to be something that you're not, because that's really how you fall into a pit hole as a head coach, is when you try to, I mean, you even look at Matt Patricia up there in Detroit, right? He's trying to be Bill Belichick. That's all the players are saying. He's trying to do something that he's not really capable of doing, and it's not working out there, right? Don't do something that you're not willing to do. Find somebody who will. And if that dude's Todd Orlando, that remains to be seen, right? I think he has it in him. I give him credit for that. So what I think Clay Helton does a really good job of is earning the trust of his players, and that's your number one priority. I know you want to maximize on your talent, but if dudes don't trust you, not only is your current team going to fail, but the teams that are coming in, if guys don't trust you, those players talk, man. They talk to those high school recruits. If it's a situation where it's like, man, I don't like Clay Helton, I never like playing for that dude, you're not going to get future recruits, man. So you got to make sure that these players, they have established a rapport and that these guys love and that they trust you. And if that foundation that you build with that team is built on love, man, you're going to see that pay dividends in the future, man. So I give Clay Helton his credit where it's due. If you're not going to be the dude to do these certain things, at least bring in guys who can. And he's done that, man. So I want to see how it plays out, like I said.
I just think it might be better if we had everybody being those dudes that could do those certain things, and sort of everybody kind of working on the same page. Sometimes it feels like, yeah, Clay will take a step back, but it feels like he takes too much of a step back. And I just wonder if he's a guy that everybody can rally around and sort of get fired up by. And when the team doesn't play like they should be, which they didn't a lot of times last year, they need somebody to be able to send that message. And I don't know if Clay is that guy.
There's a saying. My roommate actually just said it to me the other day. What matters more, man? A small dog that barks all the time, or the big dog that never barks? But when that big dog barks, you listen. That's what I see out of Clay Helton, man. He's that big dog that's going to sit back and observe everything. But when it's time to bark, he's going to bark, man. So that's what I see out of Clay Helton. I think that barking time is going to come soon. But what time is upon us right now is the closing of the show, man. So, Nathan, thank you so much, man, for hopping on, man. This is going to be fun. I can tell there's a bit of a difference of opinion here. There's a bit of difference of philosophy. We'll get into that in future episodes. But for the time being, those of you viewing, make sure you go follow Dash Sports TV on TikTok. Unfortunately, I'm going to be want to say that. I'm not going to use TikTok, but on TikTok. Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff. And make sure you go look at dashsports.tv. That's the website. That's where you can find all of our content, all the shows, and then some of the condensed shows as well. So make sure you go keep up with all of that good stuff. Keep up with what we're doing because we're coming at you with this every single week. We're going to be talking USC football, even when there isn't USC football, because there's always news to be talking about. So with that said, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.